Welcome back. Welcome back. Well now, one British newspaper described it as the 90 minutes that could change Britain. The paper was referring to the UK's first ever prime ministerial debate, which was broadcast on British television last night.
Will you continue to fund the police?
Yes, of course, but Gordon, let me give you an example.
Will you match our funding on the police? The answer is no from your manifesto.
Let me give you a very good example.
This is not question time.
Let Mr Cameron answer your point, Mr Brown.
It's answer time, David.
What matters is what comes out.
So don't let them tell you that the only choice is between two old parties who've been playing pass the parcel with your government for 65 years now, making the same promises, breaking the same promises.
So, who won the debate? I'm joined now by the one and only American pollster, Frank Luntz. Frank, welcome back to the UK.
And by the way, that's a perfect clip. I don't know if they realize it. What you just showed there is why the British people felt that Nick Clegg won the debate. They watched Gordon Brown and David Cameron argue with each other constantly for 90 minutes, and that's what they're so fed up with. They don't want politics as usual. Nick Clegg comes out and says, I'm not them. Even his hand gestures pointing to both of them and saying, I'm different. If you want to vote for change, I'm going to bring you real change.
So that just was underlining his unique selling point, in fact, as a Liberal Democrat.
And he also had some very powerful phrases. He talked about the abuses of the MPs and focused on accountability there, which the people of Britain really resent. The idea that the MPs are making money and abusing their privilege economically on the backs of the taxpayer. He talked about immigration being in chaos, which a lot of British people believe. He talked about the lack of accountability in the prison system. Nick Clegg was more David Cameron than David Cameron.
Why was David Cameron not more like David Cameron?
I think the expectations were very high for him, perhaps too high. And Cameron just engaged in that back and forth with Brown much too often, ignoring Clegg. Clegg was lucky that the two of them almost pretended as though he wasn't there, because it gave Clegg the chance not only to sound different, but to be different.
So what now is going to happen over the next few days as they start doing more polls, 2 days afterwards, 3 days afterwards, and all of that?
Okay.
What's going to happen? Who is going to go towards the lead?
First thing is that Clegg is averaging about 20% right now. By the time you do this program again next week, I think he's going to be around 24, 25%. David Cameron, who was averaging about 38 or so, I think he's going to be down to 35 or 36. Gordon Brown has been averaging somewhere around 32, 33. I think he'll be down to 30. The two leading candidates are going to come down slightly, and the third candidate is going to come up. That's going to make the next debate even more important than this one.
And more complicated because it's on Sky, so we have a concentrated audience, but maybe a smaller audience.
Smaller, but one of the things we asked, because we did this for the Sun newspaper, we asked people, would you have watched the entire thing? To my surprise, the high point of the debate in terms of audience was an hour into it. In British politics, anything that goes over half an hour, people change the channel. Not last night. They were riveted by what they saw, and they stayed until the end. I don't believe the audience share will be as big next week because it's all about foreign policy, and that's not a high point. I think the week after, when it's on the BBC, it'll be the most watched political program in modern times.
Really? And at the end of the day, the result, who are you backing at this point?
At the end of the day, you have to still give the election to David Cameron, but you can no longer say he's going to win a majority. I think Britain's going to have a hung parliament, and in fact, we now know that some people are actually hoping for a hung parliament. Can I give you one piece of advice? If there's a hung parliament, get rid of pounds. I would suggest investing in euro or the krona or the peso, but you don't want to have pounds.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's very sad. Well, someone said yesterday, one of the commentators on this said, if you have half a mind to go into politics, that's all you need.
Yes.
They said, which is another way of looking at it, I suppose.
Well,
we'll see what happens.
But you know,
we're going to be following it week by week, and we'll be talking to Frank Luntz wherever he is in the world. We can't do without him. Frank, thanks a million.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
It was a tragedy for Poland. The President of Poland, the First Lady, and dozens of the country's military and political elite were wiped out in an instant. Lech Kacyzinski was on his way to commemorate a second Polish tragedy, the Katyn massacre of 1940, where 22,000 Poles were executed by Soviet troops, when his plane, the president's plane, crashed in Russia last Saturday. So what went wrong aboard the presidential plane? And what will be the impact of this devastating loss on Poland? I'm joined now by one of Britain's leading historians, Professor Norman Davies, who's an expert, of course, on Poland and was at the first of the two ceremonies in Katyn last week. Norman, welcome. How did you first hear the news of what had happened?
I'd come back from Katyn. I was with my wife in Warsaw. We were just going into a coffee bar to have breakfast, and a call came on my wife's telephone saying the president had been killed. Everybody was absolutely stunned. The air crash is bad enough in itself, but it has been linked to the agonies of Katyn, which was a massacre, a major war crime, which had not been admitted for decades. Gorbachev confessed to it in 1990. Putin had been very reluctant, and only last week, when I went on the first delegation to Katyn, Putin, for the first time, was present and said some very decent and sympathetic words. So it looked that Polish-Russian relations were getting better, and that the Katyn tragedy was at last out in the open, especially in Russia. You see, the Poles knew about it, but in Putin's Russia, history has been airbrushed for more than a decade.
And so in that situation, he was more sympathetic, and the people around, people in Poland and around, what was the Polish reaction? I mean, did they fear that it was a Russian act, or who did they think had brought down, had downed this plane?
There was a lot of conspiracy theories. Some people suspected Putin. Some people absurdly suspected it was Putin plus the Polish Prime Minister somehow eliminating his political rival. It's total nonsense, but we did hear that sort of thing. Most people, however, knew that the president had a history of strange incidents on his foreign adventures. There was a...
How do you mean?
Well, it was in the newspapers not long ago that when he flew to Tbilisi during the war of 2008, he ordered his pilot to land in spite of there being no air traffic clearance. The pilot refused, flew to Azerbaijan, and was then promptly dismissed. And the pilot received a medal for distinguished service from the Minister of Defence. So there was this background of suspicions of how the president may have behaved. There's no evidence this time that there was any interference with the pilot, but the previous situation, I think, must have caused tensions in the cockpit.
So do you think that will have an effect on relations between Poland and Russia?
It will considerably improve Polish-Russian relations. Because of this anniversary, Russian television showed a Polish film about Katyn. The first time millions of Russians have ever seen their own soldiers shooting thousands of defenseless prisoners in the back of the head. And this will be very shocking in Russia, but it will also remind them that Stalin killed many more Russians than Poles. So I think this might set off an avalanche in Russia about the truth of Stalin's crimes.
And what sort of a president was the man who we lost last week?
Yes, he was, I would say, a man of modest achievement. He was most famous for having a twin brother, an identical twin, who was prime minister, and the two of them were a world first in politics, how two identical twins work together. But of course, in death, he's now becoming much more significant than he was in life. Very unlikely, for example, that President Obama would have flown to visit him a week or a month or a year ago. But President Obama is due to come to his funeral on Sunday.
Norman, thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for that there. We heard really important things there about the untold stories from the Second World War, and we'll doubtless come back to that again in the future. In a moment or two, tennis star Martina Navratilova on her latest fight with cancer after the news.